Queued up or anything, but we can get going.
All right, yeah. All right, welcome everyone to another Power Hour with USCPR. We're gonna get started in like a couple minutes. So maybe as y'all are coming into the chat, just introduce yourselves, share with us your name, where you're calling in from, and maybe a little bit about why you've chosen to show up today to jam the phone lines for Palestine. Hi, everyone. For everyone just joining, we are going to get started in a couple minutes. We're just going to give some time to let folks in. And as y'all are coming in, just introduce yourselves in the chat and let us know who you are, where you're calling in from. And if you'd like, you can also share with us why you've chosen to join us here today. All right, awesome. People from all over the US are joining. Again, for folks just joining, we're introducing ourselves in the chat. While we wait for more people to join, we'll get officially started in about a minute or two. But for now, please introduce yourselves in the chat. Okay, amazing. We have now 255 people with us. Maybe we can get started in one more minute just to give folks a little bit extra time. And for everyone just joining, please introduce yourselves in the chat and tell us where you're coming from and share with us your name and why you've chosen to join us here today. And we'll get started in a minute. And we have some slides that we'll screen share. So I can introduce myself real quick. I'll be moderating this Power Hour. My name is Celine. I'm here with the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights alongside my colleagues, Kat, Bria, and Leah, who can also maybe briefly introduce themselves. They'll also be supporting with tech and chat moderation. So if you have any questions or like technical difficulties, anything that comes up, you can message in the chat or message us directly. And we also have a couple speakers on, Yara and Janine, who we'll introduce in a minute. So yeah, I think as folks are coming in, we can continue to share. Please continue to share your names in the chat and where you're calling from, why you've joined us here today. And we just have some ground rules for the chat as well. So we really want you all to be able to connect with each other. Sorry, but please just be mindful of the size of the event and try to use the chat only to respond to prompts and questions. If you want to follow up with a specific participant, you can reply directly to them. If you experience any tech issues or any issues at all, you can let us know. Additionally, any Zionism, racism, Islamophobia, any oppressive language or any harassment in the chat will result in an automatic ejection from the event. So again, we thank you all for joining us here today. Feel free to continue to introduce yourselves. It's really good to see where people are calling in from. We have over 300 people with us now who've joined us for this Power Hour today. And what we're going to do is we're going to have we're going to open up with our grounding, introduce some speakers to talk to us about UNRWA. And then we'll get into doing 10 to 15 minutes of time to just make calls, send emails to elected officials. And then we're going to close out with some calls to action and resources. So I would encourage you all to stay for the full time so that you can also see other calls to action that are coming up and get access to these other resources that we're going to be sharing in the chat. All right. Okay, so I think we can get started now. So maybe we can go to I don't know why the slides aren't appearing for me, but I can just get started. So we've started these power hours to jam the phone lines for Palestine in response to the Shut It Down for Palestine campaign, which was launched back in November by a coalition of organizations, including the PYM, Answer, NSJP, and others. And this really has been an avenue for us as USCPR to gather people virtually to disrupt business as usual for our elected representatives. So these calls are, of course, part of a large network of actions to shut it down for Palestine. We've been seeing millions of people around the world engaging in demonstrations, walkouts, sit-ins, and direct actions, targeting the political offices, businesses, and workplaces that are funding and investing in and collaborating with Israeli genocide and occupation. So over the weeks, we've been able to drive thousands of calls and emails to elected officials during these phone zaps. And we've been hearing directly from staffers that these calls and emails are creating a lot of pressure for Congress members and for senators. They have become inundated with relentless calls and emails demanding that they push for a ceasefire, demanding that that the US stops arming Israel and an end to military funding. And at the same time, their offices are filled with protesters week by week who continue to make these demands as well. We also know that the majority of the public in the US are supportive of a ceasefire. So the goal here is to force the political class to take positions that actually reflect their constituents and to expose and shame them if they don't. So these power hours have also been a really easy way for us to activate new organizers, to be able to have an avenue to take action that anyone can participate in. And it helps us increase the impact of the direct actions and the mobilizations that we're organizing, week by week in the streets. So if you'd like to use these resources in your own cities or with your own organizations, we have a toolkit that we'll be linking in the chat throughout the power hour that includes information on how you can organize local phone banks wherever you live. And we highly encourage you to do so. It's a really good way to be able to gather community. It's a way to offer a concrete action that anyone can participate in. So we highly encourage you all to use the resources that we'll be sharing in the chat, including how you can organize your own local phone zap. And I'm seeing I think the slides are appearing now, so we can go to, I'll introduce the topic before we introduce the speakers then. So we know that the US government has been complicit in the systematic dehumanization of Palestinians, which has allowed for Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza to go unchallenged, which has resulted in the death of around 30,000 Palestinians. And the US government has fueled this genocide and fully backed it economically, militarily, and diplomatically. And the decision to defund UNRWA a day after the ICJ's decision to grant the majority of provisional measures requested by South Africa is not a coincidence. So today we're going to be focusing on a call to action to reinstate funds for UNRWA and to let our elected officials know that we charge them with genocide and we need to raise this demand. So we're going to be hearing from two speakers today. Who are going to talk to us about the ICJ ruling, what the defunding of UNRWA means, and what the consequences are, and why it is important that we take action to reverse the decision. So the US and its allies have cut funding to UNRWA, so we'll also be learning about the complicity of not just the US, but the Canadian and British governments as well in this genocide against the Palestinian people. So we can go to the next slide. The slide with the speakers. Oops. Oh no. Okay, so it didn't update, but I'll introduce the speakers. So Yara is an organizer on the National Executive Board of the Palestinian Youth Movement. She's based in Toronto, Canada, and she is a PhD candidate in political science at York University. And Janine Horani is a Palestinian organizer and PhD candidate in Middle East politics at the University of Exeter. She is currently based in London and is a member of PYM Britain. So I'm going to pass it to Yara to kick us off, and maybe we can stop screen share and just have a focus on the speakers to get into the topic today before we start making our calls. So Yara, I'll pass it to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Celine. I think really we're all aware, of course, of the ICJ ruling, and I think it's really important for us to start here as we shift over to understanding the cuts that have been announced against UNRWA. And so, of course, last week there was a ruling at the ICJ, which basically granted the majority of the provisional measures requested, and allowed for suggested or allowed for the case to investigate Israel's genocide against the Palestinian people to move forward. Based on the evidence that was presented by South Africa. Of course, I think there's the importance of who took Israel to court, right? South Africa being a nation that was that went through apartheid, that continues to live through the aftermath of apartheid, and really the accusation of Israeli apartheid has been one that Israel has opposed for a long time. Really rejecting the idea that Israel is an apartheid state. But we see with South Africa taking Israel to the ICJ that clearly South Africa sees a clear overlap between white South Africa's historic policy of apartheid, as well as Israel's ongoing use of apartheid in its broader colonial project. And so there is, of course, the symbolism of who took Israel to court, but then as well, just the case that was presented, which clearly showed intent, and it allowed for people all across the world to see very clearly the genocidal statements of the Israeli government and various ministers within Israel that really showed us how clear the genocidal rhetoric has been inside Israel, that is accompanied, of course, by the mass destruction and massacres, which to date have killed over 26,000 Palestinians and have destroyed between 70 to 80% of Gaza's infrastructure. One of the most monumental things about this ruling was it indicated a challenge to Israeli impunity. We have seen time and time again that Israel has been allowed to act with impunity, that Western nations, in particular the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and other nations have worked to protect Israel from the consequences of its actions. And we have seen in the case of this apartheid or this ICJ ruling that this era of impunity is being challenged in an international court. But of course, in the broader tradition of that impunity, we are seeing now a response to the ICJ ruling by the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, and over 11 other nations who immediately called for or announced the end or cuts of their funding to UNRWA, which amounts to over $662 million in funding cuts. I think, first of all, sort of juxtaposing these two, or kind of narrating these two things happening one after the other, is important because it really shows us the way in which imperialist nations are mobilizing in response to the ICJ. In Canada, for example, rather than supporting the ICJ ruling, rather than saying that in light of this ICJ ruling, Canada will cease its military exports to Israel. Instead, what we had was the Mélanie Joly, our Minister of Defense, essentially saying, we do not support the ICJ ruling, and we continue to see Israel as a crucial ally and support Israel's right to defend itself. So we're seeing a nation like Canada, which has historically attempted to pride itself as a defender of human rights, actually directly oppose the ICJ ruling, and also respond with the cuts to UNRWA. And here, I think it's important to just briefly mention, and Janine will talk a lot more about UNRWA, just the critical role that UNRWA plays in offering services to our people. UNRWA, which is the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, was established to provide services to the Palestinian refugees until they realize their right of return under UN Resolution 194. And the services that UNRWA provides include education, primary health care and mental health services, relief and social services. And really, UNRWA is one of the critical institutions that provides social services and health services and education services to our people. But also UNRWA really is symbolic as well, in the sense that it holds the right of return. And of course, we know that even without UNRWA, the Palestinian people will continue to fight for the right of return. But there has been this push for a long time by the Zionist state of Israel to defund UNRWA, to force the Palestinian refugees to assimilate into the nations that they belong in, or sorry, that they live in, and really kind of capitulate or eliminate the entire concept of the right of return. And so the defunding of UNRWA is a political decision that's been made by the different imperialist nations in order to suffocate the Palestinian people, and also to drive them away from the right of return. And I think what's important here is really to situate that this is a form of collective punishment. It's a form of collective punishment against the Palestinian people for resisting their occupation, but it's also a form of punishment against the Palestinian people for pursuing a path of, trying to hold Israel accountable in the ICJ. And maybe before I wrap up, I'll also just really encourage folks who are here beyond this power hour to consider holding local versions of this power hour, to push for your electeds to reconsider the funding cuts to UNRWA. Where I'm based in Toronto, we are actually doing one at 6 p.m. tonight, where we're going to be holding an open space at a community center for people to drop in and work on letters and emails to elected officials. And so would really encourage people to take up this work locally as well.
Thank you so much, Yara. Again, want to echo the call to encourage people to host phone banks, letter writing sessions in your own locales to pressure elected officials to reconsider the cuts to the funding of UNRWA. And just to reiterate a couple of the key points Yara mentioned, what the ICJ ruling does is it helps in isolating Israel on the international stage. It does impose additional roadblocks against Israel, and the inability of the US to prevent the ICJ's decision is proof that the tides are turning, right? Like not only in the streets where, which has seen long-standing support for Palestine, but in the halls of international institutions. And the other point, that Israel has been fighting for the end of UNRWA and its funding for decades, and that this is a form of collective punishment against the Palestinian people for resisting Zionist occupation. So with that, I'll pass it to Janine to speak to us more about what these cuts mean.
Thanks, Celine, and thanks, Yara. Hi, everyone. My name is Janine. I'm going to hopefully provide a bit of background on the context in Britain, in the UK, where I'm based, and also just build on some of the things that Yara and Celine have mentioned. So in Britain, the UK government has provided political cover for Israeli war crimes since October 7th, but also historically. I saw someone mention British Zionism in the chat earlier. And so amongst the British public, actually, there is broad and growing consciousness around the historic and contemporary role that the UK government has played in creating and legitimizing the Zionist state of Israel. So whether it's the Balfour Declaration in 1917 to the political cover and material support that the UK government continues to provide today, the British public there is a growing and popular consciousness around the complicity of the UK government. In the aftermath of October 7th and the current genocidal onslaught on Gaza, the UK government has sent naval ships to support Israel, and the UK government continues to send UK manufactured components of warplanes and fighter drones to Israel. So there are factories around the country in Britain that produce components to F-15 and F-35 fighter jets that are the very fighter jets that are being used to perpetrate genocide in Gaza as we speak. However, despite the British government's complicity, like everywhere around the world, whether it's the US or Canada, the British public have made it clear that they will not stand for it. The British public have taken to the streets in record-breaking numbers in support of the Palestinian people and overwhelmingly support the Palestinian cause and a ceasefire. So in the very early days of the current war in Gaza, polling showed that 76% of the British public supported a ceasefire. And actually, these are quite low numbers compared to what we're expecting now, given how early that polling was done in the grand scheme of, the months that we've now been organizing and taking to the streets. And despite these record-breaking numbers of people taking to the streets, our politicians and our key decision makers are refusing to call for an immediate ceasefire, let alone take the necessary action to insist on an immediate ceasefire. And not only are they refusing to call for a ceasefire, but they're supporting the ongoing genocide in Gaza by providing financial and material support for Israeli war crimes, by providing political cover for Israeli war criminals, and by escalating the war regionally. Most recently we saw escalations in Yemen. The UK government was complicit in the bombing of Yemen in response to their staunch solidarity with the Palestinian people. And most recently, as was discussed, the UK government joined Canada and the US in defunding UNRWA. And so the UK government is not only complicit in murdering Palestinians through providing warplanes and weaponry, but also through their withdrawal of urgent life-saving humanitarian aid. And so to add on to what Yara said and what Celine has said, Palestinians have experienced, even before the Nakba, forms of collective punishment, which are a crime, which is a crime under Article 33 of the Fourth Geneva Convention. And it was actually under the British mandate that collective punishment against Palestinians was first introduced. And today, we see the defunding of UNRWA, as Yara spoke to, as a form of collective punishment that, one, is part of the colonial and imperialist legacy of Britain, and two, is a prime example of how the Zionist state of Israel outsources its collective punishment of Palestinians to its imperial allies. Essentially, they've outsourced collective punishment of Palestinians to Canada, to the US, and to the UK. And again, to build on what Yara said, I also think it's important to note that the decision to defund UNRWA came only one day after the ICJ decision that ordered Israel to take immediate measures to prevent acts of genocide in Gaza. And this includes the entry of humanitarian aid. And so we see the subsequent defunding of UNRWA by Israel's imperial allies like the US, like the UK, and like Canada as a deliberate tactic to undermine and distract from the ICJ ruling. And so the action that we're all here to take today is so important because we are insisting that we'll not be distracted, that we'll not allow our governments to continue providing financial, material, and political cover for Israel's current genocide in Gaza, or their 17-year siege on Gaza, or their 75-year occupation and colonization of Palestine.
Thank you so much, Janine. I think just to reiterate, the demands here today are that we're going to be pushing for not just for our elected officials to call for ceasefire, but to push for to stop arming Israel, to end all military funding, and UNRWA. Again, this attack on UNRWA is part of an attack to destroy the Palestinian right of return. And so our calls today are going to be focused on calling for the reinstating of funding for UNRWA. Before we say, I just want to also say thank you to Yara and Janine for joining. So let's express some appreciations for them in the chat before they have to leave. So thank you both so much for joining us. And we're going to get into the calling and emailing and tweeting part of the Power Hour now. So thank you both so much for giving us a very clear history of the significance of this decision and how it's tied to the ICJ ruling and why it's important for us to be here taking this action today. And again, just for everyone here, please stay on till the end so that you can just get the links to the different resources that also you can use in your locales. So thanks again, Yara and Janine.
Thanks, Celine.
All right.
Here for participating in this really important Power Hour.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Okay, so basically for the calling, we have a couple targets that we're going to be making some calls to. We're specifically going to be targeting, of course, senators and Congress members, but we also are going to be focusing on Anthony Blinken, who's the head of State Department and controls diplomatic decisions. Samantha Power, who's the head of USAID, responsible for humanitarian aid, directly responsible for oversight and responsibility on US projects and programs with UNRWA. Michelle Sisson, Assistant Secretary of State for the International Organization Affairs. Her bureau in the State Department is responsible for engaging with UNRWA and other diplomatic organizations in the international community. And also, excuse me, guys, Linda Thomas Greenfield, who's the US Ambassador to the UN. The US is one of the largest donors to the UN and UNRWA, and in suspending its funding, it creates pressure on other countries, and Linda is directly responsible for donor obligations. So each of these people that we're going to be focusing on with this call tool each of these people has a strategic role in the government and are often the ones having conversations with other countries about UNRWA. So these are the people that we will be putting direct pressure on. So we are going to take the next 15 minutes to use the tools here to make calls, to send emails, to send tweets directly targeting these State Department officials and elected officials. And of course, again, if you can't get through using the call tool, just send an email, send a tweet, or keep calling and keep trying to get through. And just as we're going through these calls, let us know in the chat if you end up being able to speak to anyone, how it goes. Let us know when you finished. And if you do get through all the tools, send them to your friends and your coworkers, your family members, and encourage them to do the same. So I think we can go to the next slide, the slide with the QR. Actually, yeah, let's go through the tools and what they look like, actually. So this is the first one, the call tool with some scripts. We'll drop this all in the chat, but this has a script that you can use to call to demand the reinstatement of funding for UNRWA. You can use the script, you can also personalize it, but it's just a guidance for you all to be able to make these calls quickly. You just fill out your information and you'll be directed to the relevant phone number. So we'll send that in the chat. And there's also a tweet tool, which you can use to send out sample tweets to these officials to make the same demands to fund UNRWA and stop the genocide. So this is, again, you put in your information and you'll be directed to some sample tweets, and we'll link this in the chat. If you have any questions or technical difficulties, we have people who will be following the chat and will respond to any questions or issues that come up. And so, yeah, I guess we can maybe get started. Let's do the next 15 minutes of just calling and emailing. And we'll also put up a slide with the QR codes that direct you to the call and tweet tools so that you can use that as well. If you have a hard time copying and pasting from the chat, you can just use the QR codes that we're going to put up in a second. And we'll do our best to answer as many comments as we can in the chat, especially if y'all are having any technical difficulties. Again, you can use these QR codes and we'll be sending the links. If you're going to hop off to call, you should be able to rejoin. And we are doing our best to follow along in the chat to respond to any issues that are coming up. If you can't copy paste or are having trouble with the QR codes, you can also just type the links, which are here: uscpr.org/fund UNRWA, uscpr.org/Gaza email, and uscpr.org/Blinken tweet. So if you just copy or write those in directly, you should be able to access the tools. Right, what Sonia's saying in the chat, that you might be able to just click on the links and be direct to the page, even if you can't copy paste. So you can try clicking on them, or again, typing in what we have up here on the slides, and we'll come back in about 12 minutes or so. Everyone hearing and seeing that people are getting through to some staffers. We're just going to continue to make these calls for another 7 minutes or so. So again, we'll be responding to. All right, I guess we can maybe take 4 more minutes and then we can come back and continue the power hour. Please keep sending emails, making calls, sending tweets, and let's do our best to get through. All right, it's really great to hear that some folks are able to get through the staffers and convey the demands to them. We'll come back in 1 minute and go through some other ways that you can take action. All right. Okay, sounds like people are finishing up their calls. We're coming back. Yes, usually we don't play music during calls so that people can focus. Maybe let's try to wrap up in about a minute if you haven't already. And of course, continue to use the call and email tools beyond this power hour as well. And please share them and circulate them. So maybe let's give it a couple more seconds as people come back from calling. Also, be sure to send the tweets. We want to get hashtag Fund UNRWA trending and continue to put pressure on these officials. So it sounds great. I think like a lot of people were able to get through to, or were able to make calls to their reps and send these messages. So it's really great to see. I can't even keep up with the chat, how many people have gotten through to staffers and were able to make calls. I really appreciate you all. So we have about 350 people that have tuned in, and we've probably driven that more than that in terms of calls. So really appreciate everyone using these tools to do so. And again, please continue to circulate them and use them. It's really important that we put pressure to call for the reinstatement of funding for UNRWA. Really keep up pressure and integrate this into your demands. So and the demands of your local mobilization. So just before we hop off, we want to close out with some additional ways that you can take action and just share some resources that we have that you all can use. So we can go to the next slide. Or the slide with the Stop Gaza Genocide Toolkit. So we have these toolkits that we highly encourage you all to check out and use. The first one here is the Stop Gaza Genocide Toolkit, which is updated regularly with resources like the links we're using right now, and includes the links we use today to email, to tweet at, and call Congress, and some resources on how you can organize your own local phone zaps. We also have, there's ideas for types of actions and disruptions targeting politicians that are supporting Israel. Ways that you can pressure your Congress member through bird dogging, which is something we might do a Skillshare about on one of these power hours down the line. And it also includes, some resources like BDS stickers and flyers, wheat pasting guides and posters for printing, and additional resources for high visibility actions. And we also in here have the military funding to Israel map, where you can find out how much of your community's tax dollars are going to Israel. We also have, you all can go to the Shut It Down 4 Palestine website. The next Shut It Down day, these are International Days of Action, is February the 4th. And on the Shut It Down website, you can find toolkits for different sectors. So there's resources for students, for healthcare workers, for media workers, business owners, and you can also see what actions are being organized in your city. So there's a place where you can register actions or see what's happening under Shut It Down. And the goal of the campaign more broadly is to keep building pressure and momentum. So these are weekly days of action. And we also have USCPR a way for you all to also find protests near you. And the next tool we'd like to share is the City Council's Toolkit. Yeah, here's an example, just real quick, for the slides of like some of the call outs and the calls to action for different sectors, including media workers, that is up here, where you can check out the USCPR Action Toolkit and the website. The City Council Toolkit includes, this is something that we're updating and planning to relaunch next week. This is a really helpful toolkit if you're organizing around your city council on a local level. This toolkit includes strategy questions that you can ask before starting a campaign to kind of help you determine what direction you should go in terms of your campaign. It includes a ceasefire resolutions tracker, takeaways from case studies. So we've had some webinars where we've done case studies and heard from local organizers who've organized these resolutions in their city. We have talking points that y'all can use for public comment, talking points to help you navigate opposition, anti-doxing tips, and resolution templates. So like I said, we're currently working to update this, and hopefully we'll be relaunching it next week. And then the last tool I want to share with you all is something that's really, really important that also encourage you all to check out, is the Drop the Charges toolkit for the Bay Area. In December, the Bay Bridge 78 appeared in court. Yeah, we can go to the next slide and find it there. Yeah. So if you go to bit.ly/BayBridge78, this is the toolkit that helps us put pressure on the district attorney's office in the Bay Area. So in December, the Bay Bridge 78 appeared in court to face the charges that DA Jenkins is pursuing against them for protesting genocide. So while the genocide in Palestine continues, these ridiculous and inflated charges for civil disobedience still have not been dropped. And we know that the criminalization of our community members is consistent with the increased presence of state repression and actions for Palestine across North America, and that this is an effort to curb free speech and to repress public support in the face of an ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people. So it is our, for us, we're going to persist in our demand for the liberation of Palestine. And the call here is, if you're in the Bay Area, pack the court for the Bay Bridge 78 tomorrow and Friday, February 1st and 2nd, to let the SF District Attorney know that the movement for a free Palestine is not going to be silenced by political repression, and that we will fully back the 78 community members who took action for a ceasefire and for an end to US military aid to the genocidal Israeli state. So we have in this toolkit calls and email templates that you can use to drive calls to the district attorney's office to put pressure. So please call and email the DA to demand that all charges are dropped. And the last, if I pass it to Leah, who will close out for us and share some upcoming calls to action as well, is we just want to talk about the most recent actions that we saw over the weekend and just highlight them. So, in addition to, us supporting, like with the Bay Bridge 78 and the Drop the Charges campaign and supporting organizers who are facing charges for their actions, we also saw some really strong actions this past weekend as part of the January 27th Shut It Down Day. In LA and Houston, there were car caravans that took place at key airports, and those were organized really to draw attention to the experience of the restriction of movement that Palestinians are subjected to on a daily basis living under occupation. Under a complete and total blockade imposed by Israel in Gaza, there is no freedom of movement for the Palestinian people. And those actions really came after over 100 days of genocide, during which the US continues to fully support to fully provide military, economic, and diplomatic support for Israel. And we're seeing a growing mass of people participate in these actions who are outraged that their tax dollars continue to be used to fund Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza, while the US continues to neglect the needs of its own population, and the conditions for everyday working people continue to worsen. So again, the demands are permanent ceasefire and also an end to the 17-year-long blockade on Gaza, an end to Zionist occupation, an end to the US, Canadian, and British government's complicity in the Israeli regime, and the release of Palestinian prisoners. So if we go to the slide, you should be able to see some of these images from these mobilizations and these car caravans that took place this past weekend in Los Angeles and Houston. And I will now pass it to Leah, who's going to talk to us about some other exciting, coming up, either Power Hour and also actions to keep an eye out for. And we'll close out from there. Thank you all for joining.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. Good to be with y'all. I am going to just show you a few exciting things happening right now. So as Celine says, the struggle continues, and people are brilliant. People are not deterred by the extraordinary brutality of the Israeli occupation genocide state. And I want to share that right now. We can watch this clip. This is actually yesterday. Students in Chicago. Chicago will be the biggest city to pass a ceasefire resolution. We feel very optimistic about this. Extremely powerful organizing across the entirety of the city of Chicago has gotten the mayor and civil society and unions behind the effort. And it's something really powerful we wanted to show you is that often campus and community organizing gets separated, but in this moment we see students as a force for transforming your local politics to force the hand of the National Democratic Party and Biden. So right here is a quick clip of students yesterday who flooded the city hall. I'll show you this.
Biden, Biden, you can't hide. We're supporting genocide. Free Palestine.
it's just extremely powerful to see students, you know, walk out of class, say that like there can be no business as usual, and essentially occupy the city council building. And today there are also right now hundreds of people flooding the Chicago Council. So watch that, uplift it. I'll drop some links in the chat of where to follow. And we also wanted to let you know that in addition to these big shut it down days, there are strategic actions being planned in locations of power. You've probably seen lots of them. The way that I'm in DC, and you know, people in my circles have disrupted every single Biden or Kamala Harris like event in the past few weeks, right? And this really forces the hands of power. We're seeing articles that say that the Biden campaign is having to re-strategize how to deal with protesters and is kind of feeling the force of the people closing in on them. And this is because we're not only going to you know, marches on the weekends, but we're also disrupting business as usual on the weekdays. So with that in mind, if you are in DC, I want to remind that there's a major mobilization tomorrow. Starts at 7 a.m., but come anytime before work. Stay through work, strike, shut it down. There's a very powerful action that PYM-DMV is leading that we wanted to lift up. And we also wanted to flag that, you know, these actions in the heart of power uplift the range of Palestinian demands. So in addition to this action tomorrow, calling for ceasefire, also calling to end the siege on Gaza, to release all Palestinian prisoners, to end the occupation, and to end U.S. complicity in Zionism. The 3.8 billion as well as the 14.3 billion that we see, and this kind of unfortunate new demand to fight the continuation expansion of U.S. imperialism has been hands off Yemen. Yemen, you know, one of the poorest countries in the world, has shown incredible solidarity with the Palestinian people and is being punished through violent U.S.-backed bombs. So want to uplift that demand as well. So again, turn out where you can, whenever you can, use your power. We're so heartened to see students, union members, authors, like anyone using the platform that they have to build power. And we just encourage you to be creative and remain undeterred. So thank you for all that y'all are doing. I think I'll pass back to Celine for any closing words, but we'll see you next week, probably the same time, 2 p.m. Probably we'll be talking about city councils and how we can not only call for the floor of ceasefire, but also reach for the ceiling, which is full liberation for the Palestinian people. And in doing that, we can actually move money. We can do a lot at our city councils. So we'll be talking about that most likely next week at 2 p.m. Eastern. Pass back to Celine.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And I saw people asking in the chat, like, where do you find like a local phone bank or something like that? If you don't organize one on your own, I would encourage you to check out, you know, different grassroots organizations that have chapters. So there's like Palestinian Youth Movement that has chapters in 14 places across North America, cities. I mean, you got USPCN, you have SJPs. There's a bunch of organizations that may be planning something like this, and you can also plan your own. So thank you all for joining, and again, encourage you all to use the resources that we've shared, and we'll see you next week. Let's keep up the pressure and the momentum. Every week we've gotten hundreds of people joining these calls, so really appreciate you all. Thank you.
Thank you all.